Greetings, lovers of lore. Thank you for joining me for the final installment of the Bloomburrow story. In this part of the story, our heroes have arrived at Fountainport, the home of Helga's former mentor, King Glarb. Helga felt shame and anxiety for her failure under his tutelage. Her mind was roiling, while all of her allies were caught up in the wonder of the city. Mabel indicated she didn't even know where to start looking for Cruel Claw, and Helga hesitantly offered to see if they could gain an audience with the king. So Helga took them the long way, trying to stave off the inevitable. She took her party to a glass elevator that sat atop a pool of water, and an otter in King Glarb's livery used his magic to push the water underneath the elevator, causing it to ascend to the next floor. The heroes were afforded a wondrous view of the city and all of the different habitats of its denizens. Helga was the only one not admiring the city. Her mind was too caught up in fear. Maybe King Glarb wouldn't remember her. There were many apprentices after all. Or maybe her failure would mark her out in his mind. She was so caught up in these thoughts, she didn't even notice one of the king's attendants was before them, asking what they needed. Mabel jolted Helga out of her dire thoughts with an elbow. Helga asked to see King Glarb in a very small voice. His moistness is very busy this week. If you return next week, Mabel cut the attendant off. Helga was one of his apprentices, she said. That got the attendant's attention, but not in a positive way. Mabel pressed onwards. We must see the king and tell him of the Calamity beasts. The attendant's eyes widened. One moment, he hurried off. Mabel asked Helga what exactly she had done to end her apprenticeship. Helga unhappily explained. King Glarb had summoned a swarm of insects. The apprentices were to call up waterspouts to hit the insects. Instead, Helga had hit King Glarb's staff out of his hand. As it fell, she created a portal under it so it would fall into her hand, but King Glarb had sent out a whip of water to catch the staff. Instead, he ended up hitting himself with the staff, giving him a concussion, and breaking his staff. I'm terrible with magic, Helga said. Gev spoke up to point out that Helga's magic had kept the rain off of them after the bird dragon attack, and she grudgingly agreed that he was right. Phineas chimed in. Your visions are what directed us here. Mabel turned to Helga. You have to forgive yourself. Your future lays before you. But Helga just viewed the future as full of greater failures, but said nothing. The king's attendant returned and led them to the throne room. The king sat atop a marvelous floral throne, and the flat look he gave Helga spoke volumes. He most assuredly remembered her, and not fondly. You bring news of a calamity beast? He inquired. Helga haltingly spoke. The night owl attacked Pondside. The king dismissed this, saying, That's a shame, but these things happen. Calamity beasts are unpredictable. Helga pushed on. The night owl attacked other villages, and the flood guard destroyed the docks at Three Tree City. Mabel joined in the conversation. A weasel named Cruel Claw stole a calamity beast's egg. We tracked him here. Helga had not taken her eyes off of the king since she entered his throne room, so she was the only one who saw his eyes quickly flicker to a screen of leaves that sat behind his throne. The king asked, Can anyone else back up this story of yours? Mabel nodded. The lore keepers have their own people hunting for the egg. The king looked vexed. We have a genuine problem on our hands. Helga's attention was on that leaf screen. She could feel powerful magic pulsing behind it. Mabel continued speaking to the king. If you help us find the egg, we can return it to its rightful place and calm the calamity beasts. The king had a different solution in mind. You simple folk wouldn't understand, but sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good. The heroes looked uneasily at the king. Something felt off here. Helga felt cold dread seize her heart. She reached out with her water magic. A tendril of water pulled down the leaf screen to reveal a dark blue egg speckled with glowing stars. Helga was stunned. "Why do you have the egg?" The king responded, "Because I paid Cruel Claw a great deal of money to acquire it for me." Upon saying that, Cruel Claw himself stepped out of the shadows. Here was the weasel folk from Helga's vision, his one scarred eye and red hood marking him out. The king explained that he could control the Calamity beast using its egg. He could compel the night owl to defend the entire valley by weaving magic into the egg. Helga's anger overwhelmed her fear. "You've destroyed multiple villages. The Calamity beasts can't be controlled. The weavers of ancient days who tried had their minds destroyed in the attempt." The king was unfazed. "I will be remembered as Bloomburrow's greatest hero. You simpletons will not stop me." He commanded Cruel Claw to dispose of the heroes. A dozen of Cruel Claw's men charged into the throne room at his command as King Glarb wove bonds of water that ensnared the heroes. Zoraline awoke, struggling in confusion. Mabel asked Helga if she could counter the king's magic, and Glarb laughed heartily. "Her? She's an utter failure." The king's words echoed Helga's own thoughts. She sank to her knees in defeat. Mabel stared into Helga's eyes with a deep intensity. "I have seen you successfully wield your magic. Ignore what he says. I believe in you." The words struck true, and Helga felt her determination rise. Her friends needed her. Perhaps she could wield some small magic. She focused on Cruel Claw, who was advancing with his sword drawn. She pulled a small layer of water flat with her magic and used it to send Cruel Claw sliding into the king. This distracted Glarb and caused his weaving to fail. Suddenly, the heroes were free, watery bonds splashing to the floor. Mabel drew her enchanted blade. Gev readied his flaming maces. Phineas put 3 arrows to his bow, and Hugs reared up to his full height. Helga drew a water shield around herself and said, "Let's show his moistness what we're made of." Cruel Claw's men moved in. Mabel was a blur with magically enhanced speed. She cut a spear in half, danced out of the way of multiple knives and staff blows. Nobody could land a hit on her. Hugs and Gev fought a pair of raccoon folk wielding magic and spiked knuckles. Gev leapt from Hug's shoulders, swinging his fire maces in a figure 8 that knocked the magically thrown projectiles away from the pair. Zoraline engaged in aerial battle with a songbird wielding a double-bladed sword. She unleashed her magic and blew the bird out of the throne room. Phineas's arrows found a new home in the backside of a skunk folk, her stink cloud making everyone around her nauseous until a disgusted Gev burned it away with his fire breath. Rel blasted a leaping lizard folk with his lightning. Cruel Claw stalked towards Mabel. "Leave now, farm girl, with your life. You face a professional." Mabel spat back, "I'm no farmer, I'm a baker." Cruel Claw swung his blade. Mabel could see the poison that coated it as the blade clattered off of her shield, etching its surface. Mabel moved with magical speed, trying to tire Cruel Claw out, but he actually was a professional, and it seemed he could fight endlessly. He wasn't even winded. King Glarb shifted the tide of battle using a portal. It moved Mabel into position for Cruel Claw to deliver a vicious blow, and Mabel barely got her sword and shield up in time to block it. Cruel Claw bore down, and the poison blade inched towards Mabel's face. Mabel thought of her family waiting for her at home. It couldn't end like this. Cragflame burst into flame. Cruel Claw stumbled back, his fur burnt at the edges. His smug look was gone. Fear and wariness shone in his good eye. Mabel pressed her advantage, pushing Cruel Claw to the edge of the throne room. She disarmed him with a swipe of her blade. "End this," he snarled. Mabel considered for a moment. "I'll let you keep your life. Leave here now and make better choices." Cruel Claw said something that was overshadowed by a shout. The king was wielding magic that encased Helga in a block of ice. Mabel surged forth, and Cragflame blazed towards the king. For a moment, it had the aspect of a leaping wolf. Glarb quaked with fear, and Mabel wasted no time thrusting her blade into the ice that held Helga. The ice melted instantly. Glarb lifted himself up on a platform of water, his arms directing tentacles of hooked liquid to reach towards the heroes. Dark storm clouds formed above. Ral called out to Mabel, "We have a problem." Lightning cracked the sky, and the bird dragon appeared. It folded back its 4 wings and dived towards King Glarb. The king portaled out of harm's way, leaving the dragon's claws to rake empty air. The battle ceased as animals of all types fled for their lives. Mabel asked Ral if he could blast the dragon, but Ral shook his head. "With all this water, I could accidentally wipe out half of Fountainport, but I can try to calm the storm." Mabel called for Helga to make her water steps and held Cragflame up, hoping to draw the dragon's attention as she headed up the steps Helga had created. It worked. The dragon focused on Mabel, diving towards her. It shrieked as it was abruptly thrown sideways. The night owl had appeared, barreling into the dragon. The storm in the sky started to be swallowed up by the twilight flowing from the night owl. The dragon couldn't outmaneuver her. The night owl seemed to predict its every move. The dragon roared in frustration and retreated. When it disappeared, so did the last traces of the storm. The night owl landed, staring expectantly at Mabel. Mabel knew what to do. She raced over to the giant egg. It was heavier than she expected. She carefully presented it to the night owl. The owl towered over her. It gently took the egg, and its eyes softened. It then flew off peacefully. Glarb and Cruel Claw had escaped entirely and were nowhere to be found. So, transportation home was arranged for the heroes as city officials said they would look for the king. Ral accompanied them to ensure their safety, saying afterwards he would return to his own world to tell others of the dragon traveling between planes. Zoraline flew ahead to inform the people of Goodhill about the hero's return. They arrived home to a hero's welcome. Folk lined the roads of Goodhill, cheering and treating it like a parade. Mabel's kids had crafted a welcome home banner. She was overjoyed to be reunited with her family. Gev sat on Hug's shoulders, regaling an awestruck audience with the story of their journey. The Mayor Oliver made a grandiose speech welcoming the heroes home. They feasted. Helga decided that she would settle in Goodhill as a hedge witch. Ral decided that Jace wasn't on Bloomburrow after all, and he would leave. But Helga was suddenly possessed by a vision. Her eyes glowed as she spoke ominous words. "The kings in the dark will return. The mage in blue will bring about the end." Ral looked thoughtful. This was a new question that needed an answer. Mabel presented Ral with a parting gift of holly buttons for him and Tomic. Ral was ultimately relieved at the thought of no longer having a tail slapping into everything around him, and he planeswalked home through the blind eternities. Everyone else returned to the celebration. The harrowing journey was over. And that ends the Bloomburrow story. I hope that you enjoyed it, my friends. If you like what we're doing on this channel, you can support the channel by joining either the Patreon or the channel membership. A big thank you to the channel's members and patrons for supporting what we do here. And I will see you all, my friends, for the next lore video. In the meantime, go enjoy some more stories on this channel, because at the end of the day, lore is life.